1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was going badly for the Allies. German U-boats operating in wolf packs were sinking merchant ships carrying vital supplies from America to Britain. In 1941 alone, U-boats sank over 1,300 Allied ships. Britain was losing the war at sea, and if the shipping losses continued, Britain would be starved into surrender. The problem wasn't just the U-boats. It was that traditional shipbuilding couldn't replace losses fast enough. Building a cargo ship using conventional methods took 6 months to a year. Each ship was essentially hand-built by skilled craftsmen, with thousands of parts riveted together one at a time. America needed hundreds of ships immediately, but the shipbuilding industry said it was impossible. Enter Henry Kaiser, a businessman who had made his fortune building dams and highways, but had never built a ship in his life. Kaiser looked at the shipbuilding problem with fresh eyes. He didn't see ships as handcrafted works of art that required months of skilled labor. He saw them as products that could be mass-produced using assembly line techniques borrowed from the automotive industry. Naval architects told him it couldn't be done. Ships weren't cars. They were complex, and trying to mass-produce them would result in poorly built vessels that would break apart in heavy seas. Kaiser didn't listen. He secured contracts to build cargo ships for the U.S. Maritime Commission, partnered with experienced shipbuilder Todd Shipyards, and set out to prove that American industrial ingenuity could solve the shipping crisis. The ships Kaiser would build were called Liberty ships, a design based on a British tramp steamer that was simple, reliable, and relatively easy to construct. Liberty ships were 441 feet long, could carry over 10,000 tons of cargo, and were powered by a single steam engine that could push them to 11 knots. They weren't fast, they weren't pretty, and they weren't sophisticated, but they could be built quickly, and that's what mattered. Kaiser's innovation wasn't the ship design, it was the production method. He would revolutionize shipbuilding by applying mass production techniques that had never been used in the industry. And on November 12, 1942, Kaiser's Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California would prove it was possible by building a complete Liberty ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, in just 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to launch. It was a record that shocked the world and proved that American industry could outproduce any enemy. Henry Kaiser's lack of shipbuilding experience was actually an advantage. He wasn't bound by tradition or conventional wisdom about how ships had to be built. Kaiser had built the Hoover Dam and the Grand Coulee Dam, massive projects that required moving enormous amounts of material and coordinating thousands of workers. He understood logistics, production management, and how to motivate a workforce. When he looked at traditional shipbuilding, he saw inefficiency everywhere. Ships were being built the same way they had been built for centuries. Workers crawling around inside the hull, riveting plates together one at a time, working in cramped spaces, doing everything in sequence because the ship had to be assembled from the keel up. Kaiser's solution was prefabrication and welding. Instead of building the entire ship in the shipyard from the keel up, Kaiser's yards would build major sections of the ship in separate fabrication shops, then bring those sections to the shipway where they would be welded together. The bow section would be built in one shop, the stern in another, the midship sections in others. Each section would be essentially complete before assembly, with piping, wiring, and equipment already installed. When the sections came together, they would be welded rather than riveted, which was faster and created stronger joints. This approach allowed multiple teams to work on different sections simultaneously, rather than waiting for one section to be completed before starting the next. The shipbuilding establishment was horrified. Welding ships was dangerous, they said. Welded joints were weaker than riveted joints and would crack under stress. Ships would break apart in heavy seas. Kaiser was going to get sailors killed with his shortcuts, but Kaiser had done his research. Welding, when done properly, actually created stronger joints than riveting. The problem was that most shipyards didn't have welders, and training welders took time. Kaiser's solution was to recruit people with no shipbuilding experience, many of them women, and teach them to weld. He set up welding schools that could train someone in a few weeks. By 1943, Kaiser's yards employed over 90,000 workers, and thousands of them were welders who had never worked in a shipyard before the war. The other innovation was Kaiser's workforce management. Traditional shipyards were dominated by craft unions that controlled who could do what work. Kaiser negotiated agreements that allowed workers to be flexible, doing whatever task was needed rather than being restricted to narrow job classifications. He paid good wages, provided childcare for working mothers, and created a medical care program that would later become the model for Kaiser Permanente. He understood that workers who were well paid, well treated, and well supported would be more productive. And he was right. Kaiser's yards consistently outproduced traditional shipyards by enormous margins. The first Liberty ship built by Kaiser's yards, the SS Ocean Vanguard, was launched in April 1941 and took 245 days to complete. That was actually faster than most traditional shipyards, but Kaiser wasn't satisfied. He pushed his yards to improve. Each ship took less time than the one before as workers gained experience and production methods were refined. By late 1942, Kaiser's yards were completing Liberty ships in about 40 days. But Kaiser wanted to prove what was really possible. In November 1942, he organized a publicity stunt that would demonstrate American industrial capability to the world and boost worker morale. Richmond Shipyard No. 2 would build a complete Liberty ship from keel laying to launch in less than a week. Everyone said it was impossible. Kaiser said, "Watch this." On November 8, 1942, Richmond Shipyard No. 2 began assembling the SS Robert E. Peary. This wasn't going to be a normal production ship. Every worker knew this was a demonstration, a chance to show the world what American workers could do. Crews had been practicing and preparing for weeks. Every section had been prefabricated and was ready to go. The workforce was organized into precisely coordinated teams. When the keel was laid at 12:01 a.m. on November 8th, the clock started ticking. Hundreds of workers swarmed the shipway, working around the clock in shifts, assembling the prefabricated sections like a massive jigsaw puzzle. The bow section, weighing over 100 tons, was lifted into place by enormous cranes and welded to the keel. The stern section followed. Midship sections were added one after another, each weighing dozens of tons, each positioned within fractions of an inch of where it needed to be. Welders worked continuously, their torches creating showers of sparks that lit up the night. Inside the hull, other teams installed engines, boilers, piping, electrical systems, steering gear. On deck, crews installed winches, masts, lifeboats. Every worker had a specific task, and everyone knew that any delay would cost precious time. The pace was frantic. In a normal construction, workers would spend time measuring, checking, adjusting. There wasn't time for that. Everything had to fit the first time. The prefabrication had to be perfect, or the entire schedule would collapse. But Kaiser's production methods worked. Sections that had been built in separate shops fit together precisely. Piping lined up, electrical connections matched, the hull took shape with astonishing speed. By the end of the first day, the ship's basic structure was recognizable. By the end of the second day, the hull was nearly complete, and work had begun on the superstructure. German U-boat commanders monitoring American shipbuilding capabilities would have been shocked if they could have seen how fast this ship was being assembled. November 10th, November 11th, the work continued without stopping. 3 shifts working around the clock, welders and fitters and electricians and pipe fitters and riggers, everyone working in coordinated chaos that somehow stayed organized. The shipyard had planned every detail, from where materials would be staged to how workers would move through the yard to avoid bottlenecks. It was like a military operation, precisely timed and executed, and it was working. The ship that experts said would take 6 months was taking shape in days. On November 12th at 3:15 p.m., just 4 days and 15 hours after the keel was laid, the SS Robert E. Peary was ready for launch. The ship was complete. Not just launched as an empty hull that would take months to finish, but complete and ready for sea trials. The engines worked. The electrical systems functioned. The steering responded. Every system had been tested and found operational. When the champagne bottle broke across the bow and the ship slid down the ways into the water, workers cheered. They had done what everyone said was impossible. They had built a ship in less than a week. Henry Kaiser had proven his point. American industry could outproduce any enemy. The experts who said it couldn't be done had been wrong. The SS Robert E. Peary's four-day construction was a publicity triumph, but it was more than just a stunt. It proved that Kaiser's methods worked and that American shipyards could produce ships at rates that would have been unthinkable before the war. The Peary served throughout the war, making multiple Atlantic crossings, surviving German attacks, and delivering thousands of tons of cargo. She wasn't some fragile demonstration model that broke down immediately. She was a real ship that did real work. And she was one of 2,700 Liberty ships that American yards would build during the war. After the Peary's record, Kaiser's yards and other American shipyards continued to refine their methods. While no other ship matched the four-day record, production times continued to fall. By 1943, the average construction time for a Liberty ship was 42 days. Some yards were completing ships in 30 days. The production numbers were staggering. In 1943 alone, American yards launched over 1,900 Liberty ships. In some months, 3 ships per day were being launched. The Germans couldn't sink ships fast enough to offset American production. The impact on the Battle of the Atlantic was decisive. In early 1942, U-boats were sinking ships faster than they could be replaced. By late 1943, American shipyards were building ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The arithmetic of the Battle of the Atlantic had shifted. Even if German U-boats maintained their kill rates, which they didn't as Allied anti-submarine warfare improved, they couldn't prevent the buildup of Allied shipping. By 1944, there were more Allied merchant ships in service than at the start of the war, despite years of U-boat attacks. American industrial production had won the Battle of the Atlantic as surely as any naval battle. Liberty ships served in every theater of the war. They carried troops to Europe for D-Day. They supplied the Soviet Union through the dangerous Arctic convoys to Murmansk. They brought cargo to Australia and New Guinea to support the Pacific Island campaigns. They were torpedoed, bombed, and shot at, and many were sunk. About 200 Liberty ships were lost during the war, but there were always more ships to replace losses. American production had created an endless stream of cargo capacity that the Axis powers couldn't match and couldn't stop. Henry Kaiser's Liberty ships did more than just win the Battle of the Atlantic. They changed how people thought about manufacturing. The idea that complex products could be mass-produced using assembly line methods was proven beyond any doubt. After the war, these same techniques would be applied to other industries. The lessons learned building Liberty ships influenced everything from commercial shipbuilding to construction to aerospace. Kaiser himself became a symbol of American industrial might, his name synonymous with the arsenal of democracy that had outproduced the Axis powers. Today, only 2 Liberty ships survive as museum ships. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco and the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore are preserved as reminders of the fleet that helped win World War II. They're obsolete now, of course. Modern cargo ships are faster, larger, more efficient. But the Liberty ships represented something important. Proof that American industrial capacity, when fully mobilized, could accomplish the impossible. Shipbuilders said it took 6 months to build a ship. Henry Kaiser, a man who had never built a ship before the war, did it in 4 days and 15 hours. He built 2,700 ships in 4 years, producing vessels faster than enemies could sink them, and turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. The experts who laughed at Kaiser weren't laughing when the war ended. They were studying his methods and admitting that the impossible had become routine.